Good morning, everybody. I think it's 10 o'clock, and I think we're going to get started now. If everybody is here, if not, people will join in late. So I want to just start by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today from whichever part of the world you're coming from, or that you're joining us from. I guess you're not actually coming here. I am Jacinta Wang, Executive Director of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. On behalf of the museum and our collaborative partners, San Diego State University Chinese Cultural Center, we welcome you to today's the Chinese American Experience and Beyond Zoom lecture. Today's topic is Chinese Laundries in San Diego with our honored guest, John Lee Wong. Our moderator today will be one of our museum's esteemed board members, Dr. Bob Stein. Dr. Bob, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Jacinta. And again, we want to welcome you courtesy of San Diego Chinese Historical Museum and San Diego State University Chinese Cultural Center. And the first thing I'm going to do is mention the upcoming events in June and July, the lectures. In June 17th at 10 a.m., we're going to have part 5 of my Kyrgyzstan days of the Chinese Americans at San Diego State miniseries by Professor Zhengshang Zhang. And then in July, we're going to have a talk entitled Shanzhang and the Real Journey to the West by Jeff Trace. And some of you may be saying, Shanzhang, is that a city or is that an entree, or is Shanzhang a 7th century Buddhist monk who took a trip to India and wrote about his trip to the West? We'll find out in July. Right now, I want to again welcome Jacinta as our new executive director, and you've already seen her and heard her, and she'll be doing the discussant after our talk. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention our sponsors, who are the PLUS Charitable Trust and the Shu family. And then we also want to mention the 6-month rotation of folk art at our museum. So not only do we have a special exhibit that rotates every number of months, and our upcoming one is snuff bottles, and our current and most recent was the Zhazhang Ling exhibit, but we also have a rotating exhibit of folk art that we show. And here you're looking at snuff bottles and cloisonne and embroidery and jade and what have you. And then we also want to have, for our next slide, we want to introduce Yudan Wang from the Chinese Cultural Center at San Diego State. And she's going to talk to us about guidelines for engagement and what's coming up at the Chinese Cultural Center. So Yudan?
Thank you, Dr. Bob. My name is Yudan Wang from the Chinese Culture Center at San Diego State University. I'm excited to announce our summer program from June 19 to June 30. This is 2-week summer camp for the students from 1st grade to 8th grade. And we have quite wonderful programs for the kids in 2 weeks. And it's gonna be at the San Diego State on campus. And we are welcome all the students from 1st grade to 8th grade. And please check our website for further details. Next page, please. Here's the guidelines for today's Zoom program. If you have a question or comment during the presentation, you may raise your Zoom hand or write in the chat box. Our co-host Elizabeth will call on you when it's your turn. And before the program starts, we'll take a group picture. And please turn your camera on just before the beginning of the lecture. And after we take the group picture, when the lecture starts, please turn your microphone and your camera off. I think it's time for our group picture. please turn your camera on. And I will say, wow, thank you for your wonderful, beautiful smiles. 1, 2, 3. Next page, I have 5 pages. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you. One more. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all. Now I'm going to turn back to Dr. Bob. Thanks.
Thanks, Yudan. I'm going to reiterate what she just said about comments. Feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and when we're all done, Elizabeth will collate them and will tell us about them, and John will try to answer them. And then you can also remember your questions and just raise your hand when we're all finished. We don't want to take questions during the talk. And the other thing I want to mention is that we have a software that converts our spoken English words to Chinese characters. And my Chinese speaking friends, again, tell us how accurate it is, except when when an English speaker attempts to say something in Chinese, and that befuddles the software. But so bear with us about that. And right now I want to introduce first John Lee Wang, and then Jacinta, and then we'll get started. So John Lee Wang grew up in San Diego, and his parents ran the Wang Lee Laundry on E and State at 329. And you'll see that street number later on. You'll be surprised. And then he developed the laundry exhibit that we currently have at our museum since 2005. And there's also a newer, beautiful diorama that he'll tell you about later. And he also worked in advertising as an art and creative director for over 40 years, and he's now retired. Jacinta worked for the city of Chicago for 21 years and is our own executive director of the San Diego Chinese Chinese Historical Museum. And she's been a volunteer at the Chinese American Service League for over 40 years, and she studied at Northwestern University School of Law. So at this time, I'm going to turn this over to John Lee Wang, and I want to welcome him and thank him for taking part in advance in our Saturday morning lecture series. So John?
Okay, good morning, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be able to take you on a journey through the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego this morning. When I grew up in San Diego, there were still a number of Chinese laundries that were still in business. Some that we knew, and many that we weren't, that we actually did not know. That's pretty much the way it was. In the picture, you see Laming Hand Laundry. I believe it opened in the 1930s. The owners were probably a generation ahead of my parents at the time, and it was located right around the corner. But when I started out researching the history of Chinese laundries in San Diego, one of the most important things I felt was, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow find a list of the Chinese laundries, that operated there. And but at the time, many of them had pretty much, faded away. Many of the laundries at the time in the early 2000s had already closed, and there were only a handful of people that I could really talk to find out, more information about the laundries that existed, from the beginning. And I remembered when I was a kid, I used to go to the San Diego Public Library, and the kids department was on the second floor, and on the third floor there was a room called the California room. And I was always told that if you go up there, they have all the documents and history of the city. And I thought, you know what, that's the place I should check. And I called them from Los Angeles, and I asked them if they had city directories, business directories. And the librarian said, actually, we do. So I drove down there, made an appointment, and I brought my camera, which back then was not digital, okay? It was a film camera. and I got permission to photograph things while I was there. So one by one, the librarian brought out city directories for me, and I flipped through them, found the laundry section, and I photographed each page because, you know, it was going to take me far too long to take hand notes. So I guess there must have been 80 books that they brought out one at a time. And I carefully lined them up and I photographed them up close so I could read everything. And I thought, wow, this is going to be fantastic because not only do I get the names, but I also get the locations and what years they appeared. So I went through the exercise, I shot everything, and I drove back to Los Angeles and I started to go through them and organize the list. And to my surprise, after editing the list down from ones that appeared in consecutive years, and some years, some laundries would appear, another year they would not appear, then they would reappear. Sometimes they would move locations, and sometimes I would notice that some locations would be the same, but the name change, which probably meant they sold the laundry or there was a new owner. So it was really a kind of a treasure trove to come across that. And when I tallied everything up, I had a list of 91, okay, Chinese laundries. And then I sat down with my sister, my older sister, and she had a family phone book that belonged to my father. And we flipped through that and we found 12 more laundries that were family friends that were never listed in the directories. And so we added that to the list, and we ended up with a list of 103, which is the list that this presentation is going to be based on. Now, we know and understand that most likely not every single laundry appeared in the directories, okay? But that's okay because this is as good as it's going to get, you know, in terms of being able to get a real list of the locations and the time frames. Since then, I have actually, over the years, spoken to a couple people and read in a few articles online that that there were as many as, I think like 140 or something like that, or 150, but in those mentions, nobody ever is able to provide any documentation or anything. I think it might have been hearsay being passed on to them in conversations. So we don't really know how many there were, but in terms of ones that have been in the directories and accounted for with real locations, as of right now, it's 103. So in the background here, you see a texture of a lot of Chinese laundries. That actually is all 103, which I've typographically set so it's nice in a nice even block. So that's what that is behind there. Next slide, please. I wanted to take a minute to just communicate that this presentation is dedicated to all the families who operated Chinese laundries in San Diego from 1865 to the present. Next slide. Well, we know that there was a lot of Chinese laundries from the late 1800s onward, but the question was always, how did all these Chinese end up in the laundry business? Because Chinese men never did laundry in China, so why would they start here? There was a little article that ran in the National Laundry Journal in 1905, and it featured an observation by an old sea captain who was in the China trade for many years and spent time in China. And his observation was, it's the funniest thing to me that 9 out of every 10 Chinamen who come to this country open laundries and engage in a business which does not exist in their native land. And the Chinese men do not do the washing as they do in this country. So here's how it came about. When the Chinese laborers arrived early during the gold rush, they learned that Gold Mountain wasn't really all it was cracked up to be. The streets were not paved in gold, and little did they know that when they arrived, they were going to be met with a lot of distrust. And as the number of Chinese miners increased in the mining camps, anti-racial feelings filled the mining camps, and in 1850, the California legislature passed a foreign miners tax charging all non-US citizens $20 a month to mine gold, even though Chinese miners only made $6 a month. That made no sense, but this law was specifically designed to keep the Chinese laborers from working in the mines. And the following year, the miners tax was reduced to $4 a month. And some Chinese laborers stayed in the mining camps just to do cooking and washing, but nearly 20,000 of the Chinese miners left and went back to San Francisco and started America's first Chinatown. And when they got there, pretty much they were not allowed to pursue, any job that they wanted to. And most of them had to take domestic servant jobs and laundry washerman jobs in order to send money back to their families and to begin repaying their credit ticket, which is the debt they incurred to even come to the United States. And basically, there was not a lot of options and there was no turning back. So that's how they got into the laundry business. Next slide. There was even a folk tale that was developed back in the gold mine country, and it was called "There's Gold in Them Dar Jeans." It was a story about a Chinese laundryman in the American River region who got rich during the gold rush, not from panning for gold, but from washing laundry. And they gave him a nickname of John John, which was the white man's name for any Chinese man that they didn't know or recognize. They couldn't tell them apart. Well, anyway, John John supposedly washed white miners' clothes without charging them a penny. And everyone thought he was just stupid, according to the folktale. And they just brought their piles of dirty clothes and dropped them off for him. And they picked them up and they were clean, pressed, and neatly folded. And they got it for free. And then about a year later, when they were in San Francisco, they saw John John, and he was dressed in some very, very fine clothes in Sacramento. And what had happened was he somehow managed to wash enough gold dust out of the miner's cuffs to become a very wealthy man for the rest of his life. So this tale was kind of kept alive to give Chinese laborers who wanted to get into the gold mines the notion that it's fine to just do laundry there. You can get rich. Next slide. But in 1851, a Chinaman would actually strike gold in San Francisco's Chinatown. And at that time, nobody wanted to wash the miners' dirty clothes. And they were actually being shipped off to China to be washed. And at the rate of $12 for 1 dozen pieces, which took an amazing 3 months to get their laundry back. But that was the only choice they had. So Wah Lee, who's lived in Chinatown, took advantage of the opportunity, and he opened the first Chinese hand laundry in San Francisco in the basement of a small storefront on DuPont Street, which is today Grant Avenue and Washington Street. And he had a sign that said washing and ironing, $5 for 1 dozen pieces. He undercut the going rate by more than half. And to his surprise, within 3 weeks, he had to hire 20 washermen to work 3 shifts a day. And within 3 months, lots of Chinese laundries were opening up throughout the city. By 1880, there were over 1,000 Chinese laundries in San Francisco, and laundries were starting to spring up wherever Chinese immigrants were settling across the country. By 1900, most large cities in the United States would have Chinese laundries. Next slide. History would have it that the first record of a Chinese laundryman in San Diego would be in 1865. Now that was just after the Civil War, and surprisingly, 14 years after Wally opened the first Chinese laundry in San Francisco's Chinatown, and actually the first Chinese laundry in the United States. In a special posting in 1861 titled Our History, the San Diego County Medical Society noted, in the entire time before 1870, only 9 physicians had practiced in San Diego. Dr. Jacob Allen preceded them by a few years, practicing medicine and opening Allen's drugstore on 5th and F Streets in 1865. Among the newspaper announcements of the day, we find a notice of a Dr. Sing Ping, a graduate of Peking Medical School, and he practiced the art of laundry and medicine at the same time. So he was not a Chinese laundry, but he was the first known Chinese person to be practicing laundry in San Diego. On the left, we have a photo of a what they call a sat iron. It's made out of solid cast iron, and it's vintage 1800s. These irons had to be heated over the stove, and they weighed up to 9 pounds. So you can imagine, you know, ironing clothes with that all day long. It's quite a chore. Next slide. Now, according to the city's business directories, which I had, told you about at the beginning, the first Chinese hand laundries did not emerge in San Diego until the mid 1880s. By then, the gold rush was long over. The transcontinental and the California Southern Railroad had been completed, and Chinese were moving south to get away from the anti-Chinese riots up north and seeking new opportunities. It was in 1886 that there were 3 Chinese hand laundries listed in the city's directory in the Chinatown area, which was part of the Stingery or the red light district as well. The Chinese laundries were Jim Lee Laundry on the corner of 3rd Avenue and H Street, which is now Broadway, so 3rd and Broadway. Hong Sing Laundry at 6th Avenue between I and J, which is in the heart of Chinatown. Sam G Laundry, corner of 6th Avenue and J Street, which is just on the eastern edge of Chinatown. These laundries primarily catered to Chinese customers, merchants, laborers, fishermen, but they also catered to non-Chinese customers. Some were sailors, gamblers, and whoever else might be passing through the red light district. On the left, we see a photo of Jim Lee Laundry, and that was from the 1880s, 1886. And you could see in the directory in the middle, it's circled. That was the section in the directory for laundries. It was bookended between job printers and lemonade stands, believe it or not. And it actually shows that there's 1 Hispanic laundry at the time, but they listed the 3 Chinese. Next slide. The Chinese laundry owners ate, slept, and breathed soap dust and wastewater. At the time, they didn't have any modern plumbing. Every kettle of water had to be pumped from outdoor spigots, carried inside to the stove, boiled for soaping, scrubbing, tub after tub until they were clean. The laundry had to be rinsed repeatedly until the soap was removed, cranked through a wringer, hung to dry before they could be pressed with these heavy sat irons that I showed you in the previous slide. It was really hot inside the laundries. Ventilation was very poor, and the laundrymen were pretty much single. It was still a bachelor society, very few families and women here. They had no family and practically no social life, and they worked 16 hours a day after day after day, living in their laundries. And we have a picture of, the old vintage water boiling kettles on an old fire stove. Next slide. So one would wonder, if it was such hard work, why would opening a laundry still be an ideal business for Chinese immigrants? And the reasons were, it was the quickest way to become their own boss, which was fantastic. Even today, that's what we all aspire to. It didn't require any business skills or very much money. It didn't require any English skills, and it only required a little soap, water, and hard work. In addition to that, white men also considered doing laundry undesirable work, so running a laundry did not pose any threats to them. Lastly, after the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 passed, being a laundry owner also qualified them as merchants, which allowed them to stay here in the United States. Next slide. Most Chinese laundries in San Diego were run by single men until after 1943. You think about that and you say, wow, that is a really long time. That's almost into the mid 1900s. Well, the reason why was because the economy in the late 1800s was taking a little bit of a dive here in the United States after the gold rush, and there was a lot of competition for jobs, and there were also a large number of Chinese here in the United States that had come here to work. And there was a lot of legislation that was passed to protect the jobs for the white working class. And the first one was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which outlawed all Chinese immigration to the United States and denied citizenship to those who are already here. It prevented Chinese here from bringing their wives and families to join them for the next 10 years. So that would be to 1892. To give you an example of the impact of that legislation, in 1882, the year Congress passed the law, there were 39,600 men and women that arrived in the US from China. Just 3 years later, there were only 22 Chinese entering the United States. So that was pretty hefty. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, in 1892, the Gary Act would renew the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 for another 10 years. And then Congress made that extension indefinite in 1902, causing further decline in Chinese population. Now, it not only cut down the number of Chinese coming to the United States, but with all the restrictions, a lot of Chinese who were already here started to go back to China because, you know, they, in a way, had given up hope. But in 1943, there was a legislation that was passed. It was called the Magnuson Act, which eventually repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1943, allowing Chinese immigration again, but with a very limited quota of 105 visas per year. That's a very small number. It would also allow Chinese immigrants already here to become naturalized citizens, which would help laundry owners bring families into their laundry here in the United States. Next slide. Now, if some of you have been to the museum and seen the Chinese laundry exhibit, there is a map there that I had all of the laundries, 103, on one map. What I did was I went back and repurposed the information to show you the timeline of the growth curve of Chinese laundries in San Diego. So by 1911, the number of Chinese hand laundries in San Diego began to grow, okay? So on the left, which is a map from 1886, we see a yellow little patch there. That's actually the Chinatown and Stingery area in San Diego. The blue dot actually represents Dr. Sing Ping, who was the first laundry washerman, not necessarily a Chinese laundry. He was also a doctor. But the three dots that are next to it represent the three Chinese laundries that I pointed out to you earlier that appeared in 1886. So that's 1886. The second map, which is this one in the center, is 1911. By 1911, the number of Chinese hand laundries had grown 500% from 3 to 15. As the city grew, the Chinese laundries started to spread out to kind of push the boundaries outward from Chinatown. Laundries began moving beyond Chinatown, north of Market Street, east of 6th Avenue, with two laundries as far north as La Jolla, which is pretty far, and even one in La Mesa and one in National City. And those that are outside the immediate city, you could see the red dots around the perimeter of the map. So the map on the right is from 1939, based on the city directories. By 1939, the number of Chinese hand laundries had nearly tripled from 1911, 15 in 1911 to 43. And the new laundries were opening even farther away from Chinatown. Now they were starting to go north of Broadway onto 7th Avenue, which is heading east, and towards Balboa Park, Hillcrest, Golden Hill, even Escondido, Chula Vista, and Coronado. So next slide. By the mid-1930s, most Chinese hand laundries were no longer washing clothes by hand. Most Chinese laundries, the smaller ones, definitely, which is probably all but two in San Diego, were sending their dirty laundry to the two big Chinese laundries that had huge barrel washers for washing hotel linens. And they were relegating themselves to just doing hand finishing with hand irons. At that time, the old cast iron sat irons and even the charcoal irons, which you see on the left there, were being replaced by the first generations of early electric hand irons, which you see there with the electric cord. But even then, the hand finishing was still very tedious and extremely time consuming. That meant, still very, very long hours. They were still doing the 16, 18 hours a day. And after they got the clean laundry back from the bigger laundries, the moist, damp laundry was kept in industrial-sized galvanized trash cans until they could be hand finished. They needed to stay moist. Eventually, Chinese laundries, some of them anyway, would start to be using steam pressing machines and even using home-style washing machines to start doing their own washing. Next slide. Again, going back to the directory and our plotting out the growth of the Chinese laundries. Per the city directories, during the heyday of Chinese hand laundries in San Diego, the number of laundries skyrocketed from 20 in 1930 to 103 in 1970. So that's the brunt of it in 1970. In 1941, the World War II broke out. And at that time, pretty much all able-bodied Chinese immigrants had to report to induction camp to get a physical. And if they passed the physical, they had to serve in the United States military, which in its own way closed down some laundries because some of the laundries were run by a single man. And then it also impacted the number of new laundries that would be opening during that period. So compared to the 28 laundries that opened in the map of 1939, the number of new laundries during the war period dropped to just 10. And those few laundries also continued to push the boundaries of Chinatown, a few opening in downtown and others opening along North Park, along University Avenue, and again in Coronado Island. So that's the map on the left, 1949. And in 1970, you could see there are a lot more laundries located throughout the city now. Between 1949 and 1970, over 50 new Chinese hand laundries opened, peaking at about 103, adding more density throughout downtown, expanding into the local neighborhoods, Golden Hill, Hillcrest, North Park, El Cajon Boulevard, Mission Hills, Coronado, and even Imperial Beach. And again, I just want to remind you that, this accounts for all the Chinese hand laundries that were listed in the directories with bona fide addresses and times of operation, and that, there certainly were a handful or more that, that did not run or promote themselves in the directories, but this gives us a concrete base, to get a realistic picture of the growth of Chinese laundries in San Diego. Next. Of the 83 laundries that opened between 1930 and 1970, the heyday of Chinese laundries in San Diego, I was only able to find these 5 pictures, okay? There aren't very many of them, probably because there weren't, the owners probably didn't own cameras. And if they did, they didn't take pictures of their laundry. And then also there's probably some that were probably taken, but, people maybe not wanting to share their likeness. But anyway, on the going from left to right on the top row, first one is Laming Laundry, which is the one that was on the opening page. It opened in probably the early 1930s. The next one to the right is Wangli Laundry, my parents' laundry, which opened in 1939. And to the right of that is Hamli Laundry, which opened in the 1940s, and then Sungli Laundry, which is on the promo piece for this presentation, opened in the 1940s. And down below is New Life Laundry, which is in North Park, opened in the 1950s in downtown, and then moved to North Park in the 1960s. And then one of the latecomers, Bob Hui Laundry, which actually opened in 1961. Next slide. Back in the day, families seldom took pictures of themselves toiling in the laundry. It was hard work. They did not necessarily like to see images of themselves, doing that work. it just brings back memories of long hours and hot temperatures and everything else. But we managed to find 4, okay? But pictures of women working in the laundry were practically unheard of, okay? They just never existed. So on the left, we have Lai Moi Wong babysitting one of her nieces, and that was in Welcome Laundry. And the next one to the right is my parents, Ernest and Helen Lee Wong, pressing shirts at their laundry. And John Wong at Welcome Laundry is pressing shirts. And then on the right, we have Bob Hui marking laundry at the marking machine at his laundry. Now, I mentioned that finding pictures of women working in the laundry were practically unheard of. Well, we have the one of my mother, but that photo was actually taken by a photojournalist when the newspaper was writing an article about them closing their laundry in 1974, after 34 years of running the laundry. So that one really wasn't taken by a laundry owner. So that's how hard they are to come by. Next slide. That being said, there were 103 Chinese laundries in San Diego from 1886 to the end of the heyday in 1970. And not all the Chinese hand laundries were alike, okay? There were some that were different. Next slide. This is the bulk of the list that came from the directories, okay? Since the beginning, most of the Chinese hand laundries business came from walk-in customers that came in and actually put their laundry on the counter or put it through the laundry drop-off chute. And most of their customers were either working near their location of their laundry and were dropping off their laundry or picking them up before or after work. Some of these laundries were located a little bit more in slightly residential areas, and a lot of their customers were people dropping off clothes, either before they went to work while they were still near home, or they might have been working kind of near home, okay? But it was pretty much walk-in customers over the counter, and most of the customers were male white-collar professionals, okay? There were very few, in fact, I can't even remember seeing a woman walk into my parents' laundry dropping off her clothes to be laundered. So it was pretty much male working white-collar professionals. And then the other segment was single men who were living in residential hotels throughout the city, which there were many at the time. They basically rented a room, and it also provided meals, and most of those hotels did not have a laundry room or a washing facility at the time, so they would bring them to the laundries. So that's the customer base for most of the Chinese hand laundries. Next slide. Now, there were two Chinese laundries, I should say, Kong Chong Laundry and Hop Li Chong, that specialized in hotel linens. Hotel linens was their first priority. Walk-in business, they wouldn't turn down, it was secondary. And both opened in the, I guess, early 1900s, 1911, 1912, and were located around 4th Avenue and G Street, not too far from Chinatown. And both of these laundries also did wholesale washing, as they called it, for the smaller laundries, which I had mentioned in one of the earlier slides. So on the bottom left, that's a picture of Golden West Hotel, which was typical of a number of the hotels in the city. There were a lot of, it was a residential hotel. People lived there, full time. So hoteling business, a lot of it probably came from the residential hotels. a lot of their secondary customers were, walk-in customers near where the laundry was located. On the right, we see one of the large high volume barrel washing machines that it required. And the other thing it required was a Mango hotel sheet steam ironing roller. That machine was huge. It was probably 30 feet in width and maybe 20 feet deep. And they would just roll the sheets through there and pillowcases through there, just flat out, and then fold them as they're coming off the front edge. So that was hotel linens. Next slide. Then there was, I'd mentioned New Life Laundry earlier. New Life Laundry also handled hotel linens, as well as walk-in customers. They were located outside of downtown in North Park. So there was a lot of residential over-the-counter business there. But one thing that they did was they ventured into cruise ship linens, which was, another huge business opportunity. I believe they were the first Chinese laundry to do cruise ship linens, and that meant always last minute orders, high volume, and quick turnaround, because they'd pull into port, they would just call and say, hey, we've got, I don't know, 1,000 sheets that need to be done, and we're leaving tomorrow morning, or we're leaving 2 days from now. So it was a lot of pressure and a quick turnaround. The first cruise ships started coming to San Diego around 1970 at Terminal B, which you can see down below. Next slide. Then there was one other category, one last category, which was very different for Chinese laundries in San Diego, and also, for that matter, Chinese laundries across the country, and that is doing Navy uniforms. Wangley Laundry, my parents' laundry, and Eagle Laundry handled walk-in customers as well as Navy uniforms. Navy uniforms was a game changer. Why? Because in San Diego, it was the home and principal port for the Pacific Fleet. On a daily basis, there would be 24 battleships, destroyers, aircraft carriers, submarines, any kind of ship you could imagine would be in the harbor. They would come in and they would, look to get their uniforms cleaned, both the dress whites during the summer, as well as the dungarees, which were the working blue uniforms that they wore on ship. It also required same-day service. We'd pick up the uniforms in the morning and have to deliver them by the afternoon. And in the afternoon, we'd pick up another load and then work into the night or all night and turn them back in the wee hours, so that by the morning, the sailors could pick up their uniforms. It was very hot environment in the laundries because of the steam presses and things. It was always over 100 degrees in the laundry. And because of the sheer volume, especially in the summertime, we were running 3 shifts of employees working around the clock. You can see down below one of the aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers actually carried about 5,000 sailors on board. So, if each one has 2 or 3 uniforms and they have 3 or 4 working uniforms, it gives you an idea of the volume of uniforms that were coming through as they were coming and going from port. On the left, you can see the special equipment that was required to handle, the uniforms. It was state-of-the-art Milner high-capacity tumble washers, and then the steam presses. On the upper left is a picture of Harbor Locker Club, which was located right at the foot of Broadway. It was the first stop for the sailors, and they would drop off their uniforms. Our laundry at that time was working with about 8 of the locker clubs along Broadway. So that, that was, a huge volume of uniforms. Next slide. We all know Tony Bennett, the singer who became famous for "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." So he became a famous singer and also a quite accomplished fine artist painter. But that was after his days when he was young, pressing navy pants in a laundry. There was a column that used to run in the Los Angeles Times, and it was called Whatever Works. And they would always feature a celebrity of some kind. And they would always ask them the question, what was the worst job you ever had? Okay. And Tony Bennett, his answer was, I was working at a place where they clean Navy pants, for the Navy. And when I was a young boy, you'd line up in the steam room where it was 150 degrees to clean the uniforms. It was a horrible job. I couldn't believe it. Okay, so even, he acknowledged how tough a job it was. But that's what we did every day. So anyway, next slide. People always ask me, so what was it like growing up in a laundry? Okay, well, I'll tell you, but I also want to mention that these examples apply to our specific laundry, but I can assure you that many of these experiences or types of experiences were common with other kids who grew up in Chinese laundries, of which we knew a lot of them. So at the time, pretty much all the laundry families lived at the laundry. And at that time, our family had 7 kids. Now, a quick count would tell you that there's more than 7 kids in that picture. That's because two of the kids, the second and third from the left, Albert and Robert Hom, they were the children from Eagle Laundry. They happened to be at our laundry the day this picture was taken to come play baseball with us. So anyway, we had 7 kids. And so what was it like? We walked 10 blocks to school every day, to and from, with a number of other laundry kids, okay? Sometimes we'd walk with some, other days we'd walk with kids from other laundries. Sometimes there would be laundry kids that would come to our laundry and then we would walk together. Other times we would walk and then we would stop at other laundries along the way to school and they would join us. And, it was fun and, we knew them all. So it was a great time to socialize and talk about what's new. That was during elementary school. Also, by the time we were 10 to 12 years old, we were probably working 6.5 days a week, either running the front counter at the laundry, helping sort or marking the dirty clothes, pressing laundry with the pressing machines, ironing laundry with the hand irons, resorting and wrapping bundles of clean laundry, which go up on the shelf for customers to pick up. And the older siblings would actually help calculate the tickets and do some of the bookkeeping. But on Sundays, we were doing household chores, like washing the stove, washing the floor, washing the car, which was used to deliver laundry to the locker clubs. So it was a pretty hefty work schedule. In addition to that, the majority of the laundry kids, not all of them, had to go to Chinese school every day after they got home from American school. And early on, it was not negotiable. It was, there were no ifs, ands, and buts about it. I think at the time, I remember my father told me, it's not so much that we're going to expect you to be able to, one day read and write Chinese perfectly, okay? But the reason why we want you to go to Chinese school is so that you could meet other Chinese kids from all over the city who may or may not be laundry kids, so that you guys will all know each other and learn from each other and be able to help each other out when you grow up. So that was another thing that we did. And usually that was from maybe second or third grade up to maybe through junior high school. By the time you got to high school, there was just way too much homework, too much responsibility. So the older kids would drop out. Next, it was assumed that we would get good grades all the time, but work always came first and homework always came last, somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. It was kind of sink or swim. We had 7 kids in the family. I was third from the last, which meant all of my brothers and sisters before me already took all the classes that I was taking at the time, but they didn't have time to look at or help me or answer any questions about my homework. I just had to do it myself. Let's see. Oh, and then the other thing was, because our parents spoke very little English, we were pretty much on our own when it came to homework. From there, our parents continued preparing the next day's wash and laundry until about 11 p.m. at night, and they'd go to sleep, start over again at 6:30 in the morning. I guess in a way, I mean, it was a lot of work, but at the same time, I guess in hindsight, I guess you can say, you know, we laundry kids kind of got AP vocational training at an early age. Now, going to school, you know, every year when you would, you know, in September when you would start school, they used to always have the first exercise was write a paragraph of what your family did on summer vacation. Well, our family very seldom went on vacation, so we would have to make something up. Pretty much, our family vacations were a long day trip in the family station wagon to Los Angeles Chinatown for dim sum every few years. So yeah, for those writing assignments, we kind of had to make things up. Next slide. And then eventually we did get a house, okay? But for a number of years, even after the family bought a house, we still only went home on the weekends. We would still be basically living at the laundry, and then we would go home on the weekends. Going home on the weekends meant from Friday night, come back to the laundry and work on Saturday, and then go home, and then sometimes, if we were lucky, we could stay home all Sunday, and then, but most of the times we would have to come back to the laundry during the daytime on Sunday, and again do the chores, cleaning the laundry and everything else, and prepping for a Monday, and then drive back home on Sunday night, and then come back to the regular work week. So yeah, so that was going home. Anyway, again, regarding you know, outside experiences, the closest we got to Disneyland was seeing it on the Wonderful World of Disney on TV in black and white. We never did. We never went to Disneyland. I think the first time I went to Disneyland was 12th grade in high school, and it was because of the high school outing for seniors. But anyway, from the mid-60s to the mid-70s, when our laundry started doing Navy uniforms during the summers, the laundry ran 3 work shifts around the clock, doing 500 to 600 uniforms a day, plus hundreds of shirts and pants a day from walk-in customers. So it was a huge workload and volume. And when it was too busy for my mother to cook for all 9 of us, we'd order food from Nanking Cafe, which was, well, that was a real treat. They had great food. It was located in Chinatown on 5th and Island, I believe it is. So the long and short of it was pretty much, you know, all of us kids, you know, in our family, and I think probably most other laundry kids had a love-hate relationship with the laundry, because we weren't able to do a lot of things other kids, you know, were able to do. But for us, in hindsight, everything worked out fine. We also learned a lot about life that, you know, other kids who that we knew in school probably didn't. Our parents' ultimate goal was for all 7 of us kids to go to college and get a degree, so we wouldn't ever have to work in the laundry, and mission was accomplished. You know, all of us, nobody ended up working in the laundry. And to this day, I honestly say, with all the deadlines and demands, and as they call them, all-nighters that I encountered in my 40 plus years in advertising, I can honestly say I have never had to work as hard as we did in the laundry. Our parents closed the laundry and retired in 1975. Next slide. So those were the days, okay? Those were the days. Those were the days when I was growing up in San Diego in a hand laundry. Those were the days before my parents opened their hand laundry, thanks to the directories in the library. But by the mid-70s, the Vietnam War had ended. The Navy presence in San Diego had drastically scaled back. The older generation of laundry owners were retiring, and their kids were pursuing new careers with their college degrees. And as the new immigrants arrived and ventured into other kinds of business, Chinese laundries began to disappear. I mean, it was kind of coincidental that the library, when I went to research the directories, to my surprise, they had directories from 1886. I wasn't expecting that, but that was terrific. But coincidentally, the last directory they had, and this was in 2004, was 1970, okay? But coincidentally, 1970 happened to be about the end of the heyday years for Chinese laundries in San Diego. So I think I got pretty much, you know, most of the laundries that were in the directories, because after that, the numbers would just start dwindling. You know, there would be fewer and fewer and fewer. Next slide. Today, of the 103 Chinese hand laundries listed in the directories, only 2 are still open. We all recognize the one on the left, Soon Lee Chinese Laundry. Soon Lee is located on 13th Avenue in downtown. It's been in continuous operation since 1940s, servicing loyal walk-in customers, over-the-counter customers. Soon Lee is still run by the Woon family, Jerry, the number 2 son, and his family. So, that's they're still pretty much, you know, the old-fashioned Chinese hand laundry that has steam pressing machines. Okay. On the right, we have New Life Laundry, which I had mentioned, originally opened in downtown in the 1950s and moved to North Park, which is this location here on Granada Avenue, in 1961. New Life has been in continuous operation since, well, it says 58, but this is at this location. But anyway, since, I'm sorry. They've been continuous operation since back when. And today it's mostly handling commercial clientele, hotel linens, boat linens, uniforms, schools, colleges, and churches. And they also continue to handle their loyal walk-in customers, but they also have a location on the Naval Base of San Diego, and where they handle primarily Navy uniforms. So in contrast to Soon Lee Laundry, they've expanded their business model, and the Hui family sold their business to the current owner, Tom Tran, in 2002. So Tom has been running it for over 20 years now. So these are the 2 that are still in operation. Now, the last thing I'd like to share with you today is a short video about a miniature model of my family's laundry, which we always called home, okay? So let's play that video.
Hi, I'm John Lee Wong,
In 2005, I researched and developed the History of Chinese Laundries in San Diego exhibit for the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. About 3 years ago, the museum gave me a call and asked me to work with their model builder, Lois Whitner, on a model of my parents' laundry, Wangley Laundry, which was located on 329 East Street in downtown San Diego. If I was giving someone a tour of this model, the first thing I would do is I'd point out the facade. To take a look at all the signage that's painted on the window. It tells a story of what they do, the services they offer, and peek through the window to see what's really going on in there. You could see all the bundles, you could see the dirty laundry, you can see all the hand irons, and all the laundry that is in progress. One thing that they would notice for sure is a simple cloth curtain that divided the front of the laundry from the back of the laundry, which is where the families would live. At that time, we had 6 children, and you'd look around and you'd wonder, where does everyone sleep? The reality is they'd be sleeping on the couch. There were a collapsible folding bed. You had to make the small space work in many different ways. It seemed like we spent forever in the laundry, from the time we woke up in the morning until it was time to go to sleep. It was probably 16, 18 hours a day. We actually, in the early days, we didn't go home. We actually stayed there. This model was actually based on about 3 old photographs that we had. And then from there, I had conversations with my older siblings, and I did about a dozen pencil sketches of the front of the laundry, the back of the laundry, the kitchen, all the different areas based on, our collective recollections.
My name is Lois Whitner, and I've made this model and several others for the Chinese Museum. All models are a labor of love in some ways, but this one probably took me 3,247,018 hours. I think the most important thing about the model is that we begin to realize what our history was. The most interesting and in some ways life-changing is what a difficult time Chinese laundry people had and how many hours they worked. And I have to tell you, while I was working on the model, for many, many mornings I woke up and said, oh, am I glad that I don't have to work in a Chinese laundry.
I think Lois did a phenomenal job. She listened and she absorbed all the details, and she captured all the clutter that you would see in a laundry. She was building something that she had never seen before. There were lots of details about the laundry, old laundry equipment, a mixture of American and Chinese artifacts. We had to research that and then look for photo reference for her to build from. Behind the front counter in the laundry, you'll notice a straw laundry basket with a little girl in it. That was my older sister when she was 1.5 years old. My mother used to put her in a basket as a playpen while she worked the front counter. There's a list of captions that correspond to numbered items in the model. And those items range from a handkerchief ironing machine, the laundry marking machine, and my father's golf clubs, which he never found time to use. The model is definitely a history of our family, but it also clearly shows how many other Chinese families lived in the back of their laundry. So if you haven't been by the museum to see the Chinese laundry exhibit, you should stop by and also check out the new model of Wangley Laundry. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so there's the history of San Diego's Chinese laundry.
Okay, well,
My name is
uh,
Lucy Wong. I want to say thank you very much for doing it. It really touched me.
yeah, thank you very much. John, I want to thank you very, very much for this wonderful presentation that we just heard, and we'll have time for questions later on. I have just a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. The first comment is about the immigration stuff. You had that slide about immigration, and you mentioned the Magnuson Act, which really did very little in 1943 for Chinese Americans, merely allowing naturalization of the people who are already here, and then allowing 100 plus visas only, which was a piddling amount. And it was the best that Congress could do at the time because of the general sentiment against immigrants in general. And we had the 1924 Immigration Act, which was extremely narrow and extremely rigid, preventing Koreans, Japanese, people from India, Pakistan, Jews, Italians, everybody from coming in. There's very little immigration from 1924. And the Chinese immigration experience didn't really get moving until 1965, when Lyndon Johnson signed the act written by Emanuel Seller, the 1965 Immigration Act, which basically reversed everything, reversed the 1924 Immigration Act, and we have the situation that we have now with immigrants from all around the world. I thought this was just a wonderful example of the Chinese American experience in this country, and their ability with education and less prejudice to get into all the different areas and fields of American culture, and hence the laundry business faded. But I want to ask you a question. I was in the Cheech Museum in Riverside yesterday, which is a Chicano museum with Chicano art, and there was a theme there that was not avoidable of bitterness in the art. In other words, it was bitterness regarding food, regarding discrimination in labor, and so forth and so on. And it actually surprised me. And I'm asking you, John, what your feelings are as you're remembering it. You're remembering it fondly? Do you have certain bitter feelings? Or what, when you think about the laundry era in Chinese American history?
I didn't hear the last part.
I was wondering what your thoughts are regarding your feelings about Chinese American history in the laundry business, whether you have a lot of bitterness in your memories or not, or is it more pleasant?
I don't think there's really bitterness that way. I think our parents' generation, for the most part, dealt the hand that was given to them and made the most out of it. And their ultimate goal was the same as when they first came here, and that is to give their children a better life. So, their goal was to give them as much opportunity as possible, encourage them to go to school and not have to endure the hardships that they themselves did. So I think it's positive because, when I look at it, for the Chinese laundry owners, for most of them, in a single generation, for where their kids have evolved to, I think is quite an accomplishment.
No, I found this to be a wonderful talk, and I would encourage everyone to come to the museum sooner or later, which is open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, to see the exhibit that you started and the diorama, which is enormously impressive. At this point, I'm going to call on Jacinta, who may have some thoughts of her own and questions and so forth. And Jacinta?
Yes, thank you so much, Bob, and thank you so much, John. We appreciate it. it seems like this topic really resonates with, many of our viewers, whether they're Chinese or not, from San Diego or abroad. My family immigrated to the United States, for college in the 60s. And obviously most of the Chinese laundries were gone by the time, I was around. But, you always hear the stories of all the Chinese laundry. So it's great to be able to bring it to life for all of us, I think. I would love to ask a couple questions though. So, and this has been like, I've been looking at the laundry diorama that, is in the museum, and it's so nice to be able to see how it looks. And your video did a wonderful job of really showing people what it looked like, how, actually feeling like you stepped into it. So we really appreciate the work of you and Lois putting that together. But I kind of would like to know, and this is a weird question maybe, do you know the origination of the name sad iron? That kind of resonated with me. I'm like, it was so hot and heavy. I imagine I would be just sad to operate one, but I can't imagine that's why the name was.
Well, the sad irons were originally from England, okay, and back in those days, and I'd say early 1800s, the sad irons were cast iron. They'd make the mold, they'd pour them with solid steel, okay, and so in I guess in in England, they have a phrase called sad means solid. Okay, I guess it's a slang word. So sad iron is not a sad like discontent. It's sad meaning it is heavy, solid iron. Okay, and I guess they made them as small as they could and have a reasonable surface area. And even then, depending on the thickness of a particular model, they were, I guess 7 to 9 pounds.
I can only imagine that must be a lot of work if you guys, as children were helping with any of these things, right? I mean, that would be, I can only imagine that must be really rough as a small child, especially being the younger generation, having to work in the laundries. I did also wonder, like, how do you think the Chinese laundries in San Diego influence kind of the broader perception of Chinese immigrants and Chinese American culture, in the area when you were growing up?
I'm not sure. I think it was just more of necessity, I mean, its influence was providing the service that they do, and at the same time is setting an example of immigrants that are just really hardworking and and working long hours.
It was more transactional, you think?
Yeah, yeah.
But you guys provided a service that was, obviously well needed, right? I mean, you guys were able to survive and thrive and have lots of business. So that was a need that was clearly there. One last question from me, and then I think we're going to open it up to the audience, but kind of how do you think you and your siblings' upbringing would be different if you didn't have to work so many hours and work so hard in your family's laundry as children?
How it was, can you repeat that?
I said, how do you think you and your siblings' upbringing would be different? Like, how do you think you would have been different if you didn't have to work so hard in your family's laundry as children?
Hey, you know what? I guess I would just say that, we definitely would have had more free time, to do more of the things that our friends in school, non-Chinese, non-laundry kids would be able to do. That's about it. I mean, but as I mentioned, in hindsight, there were in hindsight, aside from all the hard work, there were a lot of interesting and learning opportunities. I mean, growing up in a laundry, our laundry was in downtown. Okay, it was yeah, right in the heart of downtown. And it was near the federal courthouse. And one of the things we learned was meeting the customers that would come in and that we would deal with over the counter. You know, many of them came to our laundry for a number of years, you know, and they basically set examples to us as you could be whatever you want to be, you know, because this person would be a federal judge, another person would be an accountant, another person would be a U.S. Marshal, and there was another guy who was a courtroom sketch artist, you know. I mean, so you met these people from different walks of life that I probably doubt that the kids that I was going to elementary school with ever had the opportunity. But to be able to see these people and talk to them, you know, it was very enlightening, actually.
I can only imagine you get to see so many different types of people that you would not normally, as a child, right, encounter. I think at this point, we're going to have Elizabeth maybe read some of the questions or comments going forward here from some of our participants.
Elizabeth, what have you got?
Yeah, you know, there's as Jacinta mentioned, there's a lot of engagement in the chat box for this particular talk. Lots of conversation going on. We have a question from Didi Huang. She says, "Thank you, John, for the beautiful talk full of meticulous research and vivid personal details. Wondering if you might say more about other events, venues, or mechanism that built a sense of Chinese community. For example, Chinese church, Chinese New Year, benevolent associations, etc. Also, any awareness at the time that the Chinese community would dissolve as the next generation went to college and moved away?"
I think all of those entities, okay, they all to us they all came to play, you know, intertwined, going to Chinese school, the Chinese Benevolent Association, they were both intertwined. The Chinese church was also in a lot of ways early on was and also in the later days was also involved, very involved with the Chinese language program, the Chinese school. I think there was always an objective to bring the community members and especially the next generation together, you know, for them to meet each other and to get to know each other and to be able to, you know, interact and help each other out.
Yeah, thank you. You know, John, I think the reason why we're all enjoying your talk so much is because the whole immigrant experience resonates with all of us. I can remember my grandfather came to this country speaking very little English, and he opened up a tailor shop in the first floor of the house that my parents lived in, and everyone helped out. A good friend of mine lived above the grocery store that her parents owned, and everyone in the family, all 5 kids, worked in the grocery store. And she remembers when she was 6, she stood on a milk crate making change at the checkout counter. And it's an American experience that we're all able to resonate with, and it's just beautiful how well you've put together this talk and the video and the diorama and the exhibit at our museum. Elizabeth, what else do we have?
So we have a question from Su Gong. I think so. She's interested to know, I guess, if there's a particular geographic region from China that many of the, I guess, this maybe is talking about immigration more broadly. She says, "Do you know what area of China most of the laundrymen came from?"
Okay. Yes. At the time, because originally most of the Chinese of my parents' generation, okay, and most of the Chinese that came over during the gold rush, okay, they mostly came from southern China, more in the Pearl River and the Guangdong province, okay. So yeah, that's pretty much the geographic area where most of the immigrants came during that period.
That would explain why a lot of the older Chinese generations that are here, they spoke Cantonese, right? As opposed to Toisanese or one of the southern dialects versus.
Well, I think, you know, it's most of the Chinese that we knew that were laundry owners, they spoke village dialects of Cantonese. Okay, they spoke Samyap, Sayap, you know, those dialects. Okay, very village dialects. The Guangdong dialect, which is the Hong Kong dialect, that was, I think, that came over when more Chinese from Hong Kong started coming over. Okay, but the early laundry owners spoke village dialect.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Elizabeth?
One moment. Okay, so there's a question from Jerry Wu. She's interested to know if you're in contact with any of the laundry kids that you grew up with.
What was that? The laundry, what?
If you still have contact with some of the, I guess, with other children who whose parents participated in the laundry business that you grew up with.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we still know and are in somewhat contact with the laundry kids that we grew up with, the ones that we walked to school with. You know, some of them are what we call distant relatives. The parents were from the same village or the adjacent village. So, you know, so our parents knew them. We knew them since we were kids growing up. We still know, well, there's starting to be fewer and fewer, but we still know some of the original laundry owners. In other words, Soon Lee Laundry, their parents were a little bit younger than our parents, but we went to elementary school through high school and Chinese school with Jerry and all of his brothers. Peter Hui, who started New Life Laundry, they were from a neighboring village in China as my mother, who came from a Hui family. So, you know, so they all know each other. And, you know, from time to time, we, you know, like my sister will see Peter and Grace, you know, at some event or something, and they will talk, you know. So, yeah, but there's fewer and fewer of them, though.
John,
Yes.
may I ask you a question about your last name? Could you tell us where the name Li Wang comes from, which is an unusual name?
Yeah, excuse me. Well, it's a long but short story, I guess. Is that it's actually made up of two Chinese surnames. As you know, most Chinese surnames are one syllable. They're either Li, Wang, Ham, or you know, so forth. Back in the earthquake in San Francisco, okay, everybody knows there's a huge earthquake and the city was mostly built out of wood, and there were gas fires that burned the city to the ground. And at the time, pretty much all the Chinese that came to the United States, especially coming through the West Coast, went through San Francisco for immigration. Okay, and you know, and they were quizzed, interrogated, sort of, you know, about, you know, to prove their relationship with their sponsors. And you know, all this was handwritten notes and everything. And you know, and they were filed at the immigration department. Well, when the city burnt down, there was a gentleman who went to the immigration department and said, I'm worried. They said, what are you worried about? He said, I'm worried about my records. It was, you know, so important to, you know, to have my records, you know, prove that I belong here. Okay. And I'm afraid that my records might have burnt. and the people at the immigration department assured him that everything was fine. They were fine. They did not burn. And he said, well, how do I know that? And they said, here's a piece of paper, write down your information, okay? And then we will take it and we'll compare it to the records and we'll get back to you and let you know, if this is correct. And what happened was the immigration department didn't want to admit that everything had burned. So they basically looked at it and they said, no, everything's fine. Everything matches. And that person knew that he added a couple of siblings. Okay, and so what happened was word got around, other people started adding siblings. And so what that meant was when they became citizens and it was they were eligible to bring relatives over, they didn't have any relatives to bring over because they didn't have those relatives to bring over because they didn't exist. And so what they did was they sold those papers to other immigrants who had relatives to bring, but they had to assume the identity and the family that the sponsor was, okay? And so that's where the term paper name originated, was people who bought the papers in order to sponsor a relative to come over because they were related to somebody who was already here. So what people had to do was they had to memorize all the family information, come through immigration, okay, in San Francisco, and be able to pass the questions about, what village was it? Okay, which house were you? Who lived next door? Who lived across the way? Where was the water pump? Where was this and whatnot? And in order to pass. So anyway, my father's paper name was Wong. And, many years later, the person who sponsored him was getting older in age. And he said, I want to reclaim my family name. So I'm going to go to immigration. I'm going to tell them I'm going to tell them my name is not Lee, it's actually Wong. Okay, so he called my father and told him that, they're going to call you and tell you that you need to change your name. So when we were in, I was in probably the 4th or 5th grade, and my father said, we have a choice of changing our name from Lee to Wong, go back to school on Monday and you're a different name, or you could decide to wait until later to change it, or you can put the two together. Okay, and so we decided we'd put the two together and I decided I would start using it when I went to college after high school. And so that's how we got the double name, was we decided to put it together. That way we have both of them instead of saying you're losing one and versus the other. But basically, not too long after people were sponsoring with paper names, there was a law that was passed that basically said, okay, there are no real penalties, you know what I mean? Just come forward and say and tell us. And actually the people who came over with a paper name, they lost their citizenship for a few years, then they could go back and they could get it. But that's basically the long and the short of it.
Well, that's a great story, John. So
Yeah.
your last name's a combination of a familial name and a paper name.
Yes.
Thank you. It's worth listening to that. Elizabeth, I think we have time for one last question. And then when we're done, I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. And I also want to remind them of the talks next month and the month after.